Well, it's just gone 1400 GMT. That's for Gaza. And despite international condemnation, Israel is intensifying its attacks on residential areas. In the last hour, a strike has killed 15 people at the Bureij refugee camp. The area had already been reduced to rubble, was attacked while Palestinians were trying to recover their loved ones. Elsewhere, the Jabalia refugee camp was attacked for a third day in a row. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza has announced the Indonesian hospital no longer has a fully functioning generator. A secondary one is providing limited power, but ventilation has stopped and the distribution of medical oxygen has also stopped. Meanwhile, in the occupied West Bank, dozens of Israeli settlers have set fire to shops and cars owned by Palestinians. For more on this, let's speak to Charles Stratford, who's in the Sharaf in the occupied West Bank, where one of the settler attacks is taking place. So, Charles, have things quietened down now?
Yes, Sammy. I mean, we arrived here, I suppose, about 10 minutes ago. And as we arrived, there was groups of youths behind me. There was a lot of tear gas being fired at them by what we understand is the Israeli military that are just at the end of that road and round the corner. We saw the kids hurling stones and other projectiles towards the military. We also saw certainly evidence of live fire being fired as well above their heads. So the situation certainly has calmed down in the last 10 minutes or so. But just to give you a little bit of context as to what's happened here, it was this morning where we began to see circulating on social media a photograph of an upturned grey vehicle, a grey car with two people in it, seemingly, who were initially reported as being soldiers who'd been killed, but certainly they were wearing green clothing, suggesting that they were the military. We can't confirm that. It wouldn't be inconceivable if indeed they were settlers. It's being reported in the Israeli media that one of those people, one of those men, has subsequently died. And I suppose it was about an hour, 2 hours after that where we started hearing lines drop about Israeli settlers coming down from just above on that hill. There is an Israeli settlement. There is an Israeli military camp close by to it, next door, in fact. We heard reports of settlers coming into this town and attacking local properties, burning cars, which we've seen pictures of, attacking homes also. And the situation was beginning to get out of control. We've seen pictures of smoke rising from this town as well. We understand that those fires and that attack property, or the fires from that attack property, have subsequently been extinguished. But there was also very interesting pictures of the Israeli military soldiers actually fighting with settlers, trying to keep the settlers back. Because, of course, the charge normally amongst Palestinians, and this is true because we have seen it with our own eyes on multiple occasions, any Palestinian will tell you that usually the army basically stay back. And they accuse the army of basically protecting the settlers in attacks like this. Of course, in a situation where we are seeing nightly raids, daily raids by the Israeli military right the way across the West Bank, after the beginning of the war, following those Hamas attacks in Israel, it's situations like this that are very worrying indeed. According to the local authorities, at least 32 people were injured here in Dar Sharaf over the last couple of hours. And the Red Crescent saying that an ambulance tried to come into the town to take some of the injured out and was fired at by, according to local authorities, live fire and tear gas. But as you can see, the situation seems to be more under control now. But yeah, it's situations like this that are an indication of just how tense the situation is right the way across the occupied West Bank.
Charles, when you read UN reports, they talk about increasing attacks by settlers. And talk to us about whether there's the concern about official support for these settler attacks, given statements from some members of the government like Bezalel Smotrich, who in March was quoted as saying or calling for a Palestinian town, Hawara, needing to be wiped out, and the perception that creates of at least some elements in the government giving their backing to settler attacks.
I think that's right, and I think that those kind of voices have increased and have been given, if you like, for want of a better word, sort of greater legitimacy in the eyes of many Israelis who are sympathetic, potentially, to, not to put too fine a point on it, a degree of revenge following those Hamas attacks on October the 7th. We know that the government is dominated by right-wing parties. It is a deeply right-wing government. So these kind of opinions that are being expressed by these politicians, analysts will tell you, are only making the situation worse here, are giving effectively the green light to some settlers to attack Palestinians in these villages across the occupied West Bank. I mean, over the last couple of weeks, since we've been here, and especially here in the north of the occupied West Bank, it's olive season, it's olive harvest season. Every single day now, you're getting settlers coming down from their settlements, their outposts, and attacking people trying to pick their crops. Now, we see this every year, but it's dead right that, yes, indeed, these attacks are increasing in frequency and increasing in intensity. And, yes, it wouldn't be at all inconceivable for you to say, well, those kind of voices coming from government, coming from politicians with those sort of ideas are in many ways only encouraging these attacks to get even worse. So, yeah, it is a very worrying situation, as I say, because these attacks happen on a daily basis. And that's another thing, just with respect to the military raids. What we've seen in the last couple of days is increasingly Israeli military raids on West Bank towns and villages, actually occurring in daylight hours. We already know that there have been 1,900 plus arrests of Palestinians since October the 7th, 65 arrests at least overnight, 132 Palestinians at least killed, plus 2 in custody. But we're seeing these Israeli military raids now happening during the daytime, which would suggest, you know, a greater sense of confidence, a greater sense of purpose, if you like. And so, as you can imagine, there are hundreds of thousands, many more than that, Palestinians living in towns and villages across the West Bank that are living in fear, and especially, as I say, at night. But now, as this indicates, this sort of thing is happening in broad daylight.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Charles Stratford, for your reporting.